Hi, I'm Pat Arabito, executive producer of the Seventh Day series. I married Jim Arabito back in 1976. Over the next 7 years, we had 4 children: Tony, Joey, Adel, and Andy. Jim did artwork for a living, but he loved evangelism. And he began to put together a series of Bible studies on history using visuals that he had collected and sharing those in people's homes. Eventually, we ended up sharing in a lot of churches, and we moved into a 35-foot fifth wheel. We had our first 2 sons then, Tony and Joey. When we moved out 3.5 years later, we had 4 children, and we all fit, amazingly. In 1977, when our first son was just 6 months old, Jim took his first trip overseas to collect photographs for his presentations. Just a few weeks after Jim got back from Europe, there in 1990, got a call from our friends Roger and Diane Merrill in Alaska, reminding him that he needed to come up and finish filming for the Menelik story before the snows came. He was fortunate to have enough mileage on his travel bank to take our 2 oldest sons with him. Tony was 13, Joey was 11, and it was the dream of their lives to go to Alaska and see bears and elk and moose and get to fish in the rivers and meet the people of Alaska. So they were really excited that they could go with them. For 10 days up there, they did all those things. Jim interviewed some of the people there and took some more footage from the areas where Menelik had lived. On Sunday, September 2, Jim and Tony and Joey and Beth Wainwright, a young student from New Zealand, boarded the Merrill Cessna with Harry Uglywook, the pilot, to head out from Kotzebue down to Anchorage. They were scheduled to catch a flight out of Anchorage into LA early on Monday morning. The day wore on, and as evening came, a storm blew up. And evidently, the plane was blown off course. It was quite late. Harry radioed in for IFR clearance about 11:30 or 11:45 that night. Evidently, he knew he was in trouble and he wanted to get up above the storm. That was the last contact that anyone had with the plane. At home, I put the kids to bed, canned some pears, and then gone to bed, woke up Monday waiting to hear from them that they had landed in LA. We had sent David Holmes down to pick them up. The kids and I were waiting at home for a phone call that they had landed. David did call, but what he said was that they didn't seem to be on the plane and that their names weren't even on the passenger list. So that was kind of shocking to me, and I picked up the phone then and called the Merrills up in Alaska. And that's when I found out that their plane had never even landed in Anchorage. You can imagine the shock that was. So I called the kids in from outside where they were playing, and we knelt down and prayed for the safety of our family. And we had been praying every day that they would return safely and that they would be kept safe while they were up there. That night when I went to bed, I was praying, and I really believed that Jim's work wasn't done yet, and that if their plane had been forced to land, that they were all okay, because God had led so far and he'd made it obvious that he wanted this work done. But when I went to bed, I prayed and I asked God to talk to me, give me some words. And the verse that I came to was in Job, and it was chapter 23, verse 10. The verse that says, "I know the way that you take, and when I have tried you, you shall come forth as gold." And I remember thinking, I wonder why God would say that to me. Maybe it's just a trial to not know. Tuesday morning, I heard from Search and Rescue that they were out looking. They hadn't been able to do much on Monday because of bad weather. And my brother also is a pilot, and so he was keeping in touch with them as well. All day long, my house was filling up with people because they'd heard the news and everyone wanted to wait there with me. Early in the afternoon, I had another call that Search and Rescue had spotted the plane and they were sending a helicopter in. I called my brother and he said, well, he would call them and find out what was up. He called me back a little bit later and he said, "I'm going to fly over and be with you when you get the news." He lived in Sacramento and he had his own plane. In the meantime, my dad was there, Elder Doss, our other pastor, Elder Rich, and quite a few friends. Dad went up to the airport, I don't know if it was a half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour later, to pick my brother up. And he brought him home, and when Tom got to the door, he took me by the hand and walked me outside. And he put his arms around me and my dad, and he said, "There are no survivors." And for me, it was like there was no world or no time or no nothing. The words just kept going around and around in my head, and I didn't even know how long I was out there. Finally, someone came and said, "The kids are getting kind of restless." So I went back in the house, and Andy just ran to me with this accusing look on his face, and he said, "My daddy's dead, isn't he?" And then Adel came and she said, "And how about Tony and Joey?" And even if I'd said no, it was too true. How could I say no? And I felt like we were this one little blob of intense agony in this huge universe. And all around, everyone was experiencing it. We were all in agony. And yet, even in the midst of that, there was a sense of God's presence. And it was almost like, where could God be when something like that happens? But rather, it was like God was right there, and it was his agony too. And I had a sense of his presence and of his suffering. And it was his loss, not just ours. It wasn't too much longer, and Adel said, "Boy, Mom, I'm sure glad you're not the kind of person that blames God for everything." She was almost 9, Andy was 7. At the same time, I think maybe Andy was blaming God for everything. He had such a different perspective. We're all so different. As parents, we try so hard to raise our children without damage and without having to suffer pain in this world. And yet, it happens. And I found that God is sufficient, that he has to be sufficient, and he has to be enough for us and for our children in this life of sorrow. There's been a lot of speculation through the years about the cause of the crash and about whether there was foul play involved. I have the NTSB reports, the FAA reports, which say that it was bad weather and pilot error. And there is no evidence that there was any foul play involved. And I would not ever want to give the impression that God is not able to take care of his people against evil forces in this world. I believe that God allowed it. For what purpose, I don't know, but I believe that God is good and that he only means good for us, and that everything that he allows to come to his people in the world is only for the purpose of ultimate good. And the question for me never was why it happened to me, but the question always was, do I trust God or do I not? And I choose to trust him in this.